I don't know if we're going to look at Mark 14 verses 1 through to 11. I don't know if anyone would like to read it out in a really loud voice. Thank you.
I don't know how loud the voice will be though.
Okay. Shout.
Jesus anointed at Bethany. Now the Passover and the festival of the unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came in with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them at any time you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money, so he watched for an opportunity to hand him over.
Thank you, that's great. I wonder if we could have the questions up for later. Thank you. So later, you guys are going to have a chance, as always, to talk about this and think about it together. So I'm just going to start by having a few thoughts myself, maybe talk a little bit about the context, when this is happening in the book of Mark. Also, there's quite a lot of people mentioned in this passage, so we're going to have a little look at the different characters. And also I noticed as I was reading through it, there's a lot of emotions going on as well. So we're going to have a look at some of those emotions, just kind of wet the whistle, as my friend would say, kind of just get you going, thinking about it, and then you can talk about it more together in groups. So we read in this passage that it's 2 days till the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread, which means it's 3 days before Jesus dies at this point. This is when this story happens. And it also seems there's another passage in one of the other Gospels, John, that tells the same story. And we find in that story that this woman is actually Mary, Martha and Lazarus' sister. And really, if we look at this passage, the main bit of this story concerns Jesus and Mary. But there's all these other characters, so we're going to have a little think about those. I sort of noticed as I was reading this that there's a bit of a religious leader sandwich going on here. The first 2 verses and the last 2 verses, we hear a lot about the religious leaders. And they're just trying to kill Jesus, basically. They're scheming to arrest him and kill him secretly. So it doesn't tell us exactly what their motivation was. We can imagine maybe some part of it was jealousy, because Jesus was really popular and he was doing lots of, more than anything, he wasn't popular with everyone, the religious leaders, for example, but he was doing amazing things and he taught with authority and people were just pretty gobsmacked by him. And he was beginning to get quite a following. I wonder maybe they were also motivated by religious zeal. I don't think they really believed that Jesus did come from God. He wasn't who he said he was, and so they were trying to protect their own religion from heresy, maybe. But I think what we do see in this passage is fear. They particularly don't want to arrest him or kill him during the festival. In verse 2 it says, because there might be a riot. We might know that at this time in history, Jesus' nation, Israel, was under Roman rule, and the last thing that the religious leaders wanted was a riot, because Rome was kind of letting them get on with their thing, and a lot of this is fear and self-protection. They don't want trouble at all. And then just skipping to the end, we see the other piece of bread of the sandwich, as it were. one more emotion, which is delight. They're very delighted to find that one of Jesus' close friends, Judas, has come to them and has agreed to take part in their scheme to kill Jesus. And it's kind of in contrast with the love that we see a little bit later on with Mary, the woman who pours perfume on Jesus. And then of course we have Jesus, another very important character, not much of an understatement there, in this passage. And I just wonder how he felt at this point. Just thinking, he's been walking towards Jerusalem for quite a long time. He keeps trying to tell his friends that his time has come and that he's getting close to the point where he's going to have to die. And it sort of feels like mostly they just don't get it and they don't understand him. And I just thought, I wonder how lonely that felt for him at that point. Just knowing that he was facing something unbelievably and indescribably terrible, and the people who were closest to him didn't really get it. But somehow Mary, this woman, comes and she just loves Jesus. And we know from other things about Mary and Martha that there was another time where she just sat at his feet and listened to him. And then we just see her love for him. We'll talk a bit more about that later on. But I wonder how the pouring of the perfume, Jesus very much connects it with his own death. I wonder how much of a comfort that was to him, just that very act of having perfume just lovingly poured over him. Simon the leper, I think he's a bit of a cameo, but we'll give him a mention. Probably was an actual leper, that's the name, and definitely wouldn't be at this point, because otherwise he would not be hosting a meal for all of his friends. So someone, again, that Jesus healed, I would imagine, generously hosting all of these people, which is great. And then we get to the crowd, or some of those present that are mentioned in verses 4 and 5. Lots of emotion there: indignant, critical, judgy, kind of a little bit holier than thou, pointing to the very important, and we all recognise it's important, duty to help the poor. But then they're laying into Mary. It says they rebuke her harshly. Sounds a bit angry to me. But this also shows their attitude towards Jesus in the middle of all of this, that he was not worth expensive perfume at all. And I just wanted to sort of pick up Jesus' response. So verse 6, "Leave her alone," Jesus said. "Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me." And I don't know about you, but I've read that before and thought, oh, that feels almost a little bit dismissive. But actually, I think Jesus is referring them back to the Old Testament law. So in the book of Deuteronomy, one of the books that talks about Israel's old law, we find this phrase, "the poor you will always have with you." And it's in a chapter where the law is encouraging Israel, the whole God's people, to be open-handed, so really, really generous. The poor you'll always have, so be open-handed to them. Don't try and rip them off. Don't calculate how much you're going to lend them compared to how close you are to their Jubilee year of giving everything back. Just give open-handedly. And so that chapter that in the law is encouraging God's people to be generous all the time, to live a life of generosity. And so I think Jesus is maybe highlighting that their words and their heart might not quite be matching up at this point. And it's a good challenge to us too. Do we sometimes get into judging other people? And do our lives meet the standards and values that we're expecting other people to meet? So I think that's pretty much all of the characters. So I just wanted to spend a bit more time thinking about Jesus and Mary. This is, I just think, a really profound meeting of two people. And Mary has this really expensive perfume. So nard was imported from India, apparently. It was really rare, really expensive. And they say, don't they, in this passage, it's worth a year's wages. It's a ridiculous amount of money. And Mary doesn't pour a little bit on Jesus' head and then save the rest for herself. Like this I've heard it described by other commentators that this bottle of perfume was like her life savings equivalent of her sort of security for hard times. And she breaks the bottle. She doesn't just open the lid and pour it out, she breaks it. So lavishly, Jesus gets everything that's in that bottle. The whole year's wages worth of perfume is on his head in the next kind of few minutes. Nothing left for herself, all given away, bottles broken, bridges are burned, there's no turning back, Jesus gets it all. And as we've said, she gets criticised by the people at Simon's house for not using the gift more strategically. How many people could she have fed if they'd sold that perfume? Is what the crowds are saying. She could have done more good than she did. As people who follow Jesus, we're called to waste our life on him, to break open the bottle and give away all that we have to him, surrender ourselves completely. And I think sometimes people can look at us and think we're a bit mad, a bit ignorant, a bit out of our mind for doing that. Doesn't really fit with the standards and judgments of our culture that we would waste our lives on Jesus. And Mary's criticised, Jesus is dissed. But Jesus massively honours Mary. He really sees her heart and her desire to give. And I was thinking about the fact that the crowd, the people at Simon's house, the way that they criticised her made it seem like it was either or. Either you love Jesus or you feed the poor, and obviously it's better to feed the poor. But I just don't think that's the way it is. When you meet Jesus and have the courage to break your jar and pour it all out, then everything starts to change. Start to become who we were created to be. And kind of that spiritual emptiness, which we see, we've all got, us human beings, starts to get filled with the love of our Creator. And the more we hang out with him, like Mary had already hung out with Jesus at this point, the more we become like him. And it's really interesting to think that 3 days after having all of Mary's love and all that perfume lavishly poured out for him, Jesus himself pours out his whole life, his blood shed, his life gone. He pours out his love for the entire world. Radically broken, radically poured out for us. So when we belong to Jesus and we know how loved we are, it makes us free to actually live that life that that God dreamed of in the law, that his people would be open-handed and generous, understanding that they live amongst people who are poor. When we belong to Jesus and know how loved we are, we can be free to live lives of love, be open-handed, giving generously of our whole lives, not just our stuff, living for Jesus and living for others as well. That's what we're called to do. So it isn't an either or. We waste our lives on Jesus, and then he calls us to just give our lives to others. So those were just some thoughts that I had. So if you want to gather into little groups, as normal, some questions for discussion. What is Jesus like? What stands out? How are other people interacting with Jesus? What about the woman with the perfume? What emotions can you spot? What do you make of them? Can you place yourself, I need my glasses, among these stories? What do you see, think, feel? Gosh, I really am quite blind without them. As you're past them, is there anything thank you? Is there anything from this evening that relates to you and affects you in your life? What would it mean for you to break the perfume bottle and pour it all out? And any other questions or thoughts?